Schneider, sorry,
Schroeder.
and
Here.
myself, Peru, here.
Okay, and
I'm
Peter
sorry,
is,
I need to call Peter Dunbrook. Not present.
not here yet. Okay. Eric, any announcements?
No, just welcome everybody to the special board meeting. If you'd like to speak, please use the raise your hand function. And all votes be by a roll call.
Right. There are any corrections to the agenda, which is one item plus a public hearing? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment on an item not on today's agenda? You are welcome to raise your hand. I'll wait for a moment, Eric, just to see if anybody wants to speak.
I'll keep you posted. I've seen none though.
Okay. Move on.
I see
item-
Peter. Peter just, he's coming in.
Oh, great. Great, terrific. We'll move on. Item 6 is written comments from the public. We've obviously gotten a number of letters and emails, and they are all in the packet or the supplement packets that have been sent out. Thank you for all that written comment, by the way. We'll move on to item 7, items for board action. 7A is KMPUD wildfire mitigation plan. Brandy.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Brandy.
So we are required by the Public Utilities Code to have a wildfire prevention plan that we have reviewed by an independent evaluator and presented to the board. We did this previously. This is this year's updated version, and the independent evaluators' comments are included in your packet. The conclusion of the independent auditor was that our plan was comprehensive and meets all of the requirements. They had a few minor changes, which I have incorporated into the version before you. So we are requesting that the board approve this and recommend that we submit it to the State Wildfire Advisory Board. This was presented to operations, and there was a comment on section E where the plan talks about when we shut off the power line. The current verbiage is under extraordinary circumstances. The operations committee asked us to review that for the next plan's implementation and to see if a more formulaic approach would be appropriate. And staff plans to do that for the next version.
Okay. Peter, do you want to say anything from the operations
Yeah, the
committee?
committee basically recommended approving this. This is kind of a bureaucratic red tape. We only have 2 miles of overhead line, actually less than 2 miles. In reality, our biggest mitigation would be to get the Forest Service to approve on a more timely basis us removing hazard trees. That's the reality, but this is just a formality, and we recommend that the board approves it.
And then one other thing I thought was important to mention is that Brandy reminded us that when we take the line down, I'm probably not using the right vocabulary, Brandy, but we don't, or de-energize, I guess is the word. We don't automatically re-energize. It's done manually after inspection. And that's the other really important aspect to our system.
Good point.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any comments or discussion on this matter from public or from the board? And if not, certainly entertain a motion to approve this plan and have it transmitted to which agency, Brandy?
The State Wildfire Advisory Board.
The State Wildfire Advisory Board. Is there such a motion?
Dornbrook, so moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Bertrand seconds. Roll call.
Rickard,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Norbert, aye, it's unanimous.
Okay, Brandy, thank you for putting this together.
Brandy, one question. Are other load serving entities, are these plans public?
Yes, they are, especially the ones that I've looked at are public utilities, but yes, they are public.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move.
Should they be available on the website for review by the public?
I don't think it's a requirement, but if the board would like us to do that.
Well, Bertrand, are you saying this plan or any plan throughout the
No,
state?
I'm talking about the wildfire plan, yeah.
But this plan, not, I mean, not
Yeah.
PG&Es or
No,
Calidus's or.
I'm talking about our plan for wildfire. I
Yeah,
just want, it's an open question.
Yeah, no, I think that this kind of document
Okay.
is, it should be, I mean, could be, should be, when the website has a tab for important documents, things like this can I think reside there.
We've made those changes, so it can be added anytime.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, I think it's probably easy to do then, right?
Right.
I assume. Okay. Move on to item 8. This is the public hearing, proposed changes to electric rates and rate structure and possible adoption of the ordinance 21-02, revising electric rates and rate structure. So let me describe how I would like this conversation to go. I mean, the organization wise. First, I'd like Eric to give a staff report on the work that's been done since our meeting on June 12th, which is pretty much in staff report. And second, I'd like to show a couple slides about how we might organize this conversation and just make sure that we touch all the bases that people think we should touch. Third, then we'd open the public hearing. And by the way, as we're doing the staff report and going through these preliminaries, if people would like to speak would indicate that by raising your hand so we know how many people, just in case we feel like we need to limit time. We can do that by policy, but we've rarely done it. If there are many people who want to speak, we may want to implement that. Then we'll close the public hearing and bring it to the board for discussion. And we put together these slides, topic by topic. And so Eric, why don't you do staff report, and then we'll come back to this and show the first couple slides.
Howard had a question, or you're just saying you wanted to comment?
He will, I think it means
No,
he will
you
want.
said to raise your hand, and so I'm raising my hand now to let you know.
Exactly.
I want to comment. I don't want to comment now, so it was a little unclear what you wanted.
Yeah, no, what I'd like is for people to indicate that they will want to speak during the public hearing portion after the public hearing is open, just so I know how many people want to speak. Thank you, Howard. That's you did it right. Eric, do you want to give a staff report to start with?
Sure. Let me do a new share here. As per board direction, we reran, we ran 3 new models, which would include an additional $270,000 to offset property tax in the fund, as well as including the 1 cent per kilowatt hour to facilitate 100% REC purchases or renewable energy credit purchases. And so we did run that for both, ran the scenarios that would do that. Ran one, which was to put the entire $270,000 in the usage rate, which is this model you see here at 19 cents. You can compare where things distribute out on that compared to the 14.7 cents previously submitted. Then we ran one which put all of the $270,000 in the base rate. So left the usage rate at the 14.7 cents. And although the board didn't request it, we thought it best to run a third scenario, which was a 50-50, just to give an idea what that would look like, which was 50% of the 270,000 in base rate and 50% of the 270,000 in the usage rate. And other than that, nothing has changed from the prior presentation.
And you've got that sheet too, right?
This
The
one
one-
right here. This is the one. With
Oh, that is a 50-50, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. And then you also looked at that concept of migrating to an average
We
for different.
did, and I don't have to find
You
it.
went past it already. It was
Did I?
earlier.
I was in the other, it was in the other,
Right there.
this one?
Next
No,
page.
No, I think it was in the supplement.
It was in
packet.
the other, it was in the other, there was too many supplements that came out, so I have to switch back to, let me do a new share to the original. I think this is the original. This is the one I think you mean, Bob.
Yeah.
There we go. And then we did run one, run a scenario based on type of residence, and it found it to be pretty inequitable and disparate. So we recommend not going down that path, but again, it's at the board's pleasure.
Okay, now.
You want me to switch back to the other one, yours, Eric?
Yeah, yes, although yes, because we're going to be addressing all these things in the discussions.
Correct.
And I want to show everybody what we'll be discussing, or the order of what we'll be discussing, so they can
Sure.
include it in their public comments if they'd like.
There
So
you
if
go.
you go on to the next slide.
Yep.
So the first slide expresses what, at least I believe, decisions that have been made. And I want to see if there's agreement on this. The first is that we more closely align the base rate revenue with fixed cost and usage rate revenue with variable costs. There's still a lot of discussion about how closely, how much we match those things up. And there's a range of possibilities that people have described, and range of possibilities in the staff report. But at least moving in the direction of this more closely aligning, I think there was a decision or agreement that we should do that. Second, that we should include 1 cent per kilowatt hour in the usage rate, so we can purchase the Tier 1 RECs to bring us to 100% renewable. Third, that because we've now understand that we will need to sort of reserve an allocation of property taxes to wastewater so that we can finance the wastewater treatment plant renovation, that we need to raise revenues in electric, because to date, electric has taken as much as $650,000 or $660,000 out of our $850,000 of property taxes. And there are other departments that also need to use that. And so if wastewater treatment needs a certain amount, we agreed last time to incorporate one way or another the $270,000 in our electric rates. And this would be required whether new rate structure is adopted or not. So as I understand it, it's if we just stayed with the structure we have right now, the 65.6 would go up about 4 cents.
Or the base rate would go up $20.
Or the base rate, which is now 14 something, would go up $20.
Right.
Right. But it's a necessary step one way or another. I think we've agreed that 1 EDU, if we change structures, is average monthly use divided by 230 kilowatt hours, which is the overall average residential kilowatt hour consumption per month. How we calculate average monthly use, it will be a major point of discussion. But whatever that is, divided by 230 becomes the 1 EDU. And I believe we've decided that everyone should pay at least some amount towards our fixed cost, towards having put in this a very reliable electrical system. And we settled on 1/2 of 1 EDU for that, for those things. So let me just stop there. Is there agreement on the board that these were decisions that have been made?
I agree on the first 4 points. On the minimum EDU, I think that's an arbitrary number that we come up with, and depending on what the final structure of how we do our baseline, that may have to be revisited. I'm not dead set against that 0.5, but I think it's premature to fix it in stone, in my opinion.
Okay. Anyone else?
Eric, this is Bob. I agree with the 5 points.
Okay.
Yeah, and John Schroeder, yeah, I think this is what we agreed to.
Peter, do you have any thoughts?
I concur with that.
Okay. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So these are the things that we still need to discuss, either to confirm what's been discussed before, or change it, or make a different kind of decision, or make a new decision. And I would like Eric to keep these points up while people talk, because I want them to understand what it is that we'll be discussing. And if they have comments on these things, we'd certainly like to hear them. So let me just go through it. The first thing we'll discuss is the base rate and usage rate, without considering yet what how the average monthly use would be calculated. But what should the base rate be? What should the usage rate be? This really gets at how much of our fixed costs do we want to cover with base rate, and how much of our variable costs do we want to cover with usage rate. Then the second big category is calculations of average monthly use. And a lot of the comments we've gotten have more to do with this than with anything else. The first bullet just addresses the idea that was analyzed by staff, the 1.4, 1.1, 0.8, where there's a lot of change, and staff recommends that we no longer consider that. The second is over what period of time should the AMU be calculated? Third, fourth, fifth, all have to do with different flavors of homes and ownership. Then a question that I have, so I put it in, we've not really addressed what happens when there's a significant addition to an existing home or a facility. And then the 9 existing homes with solar panels is another topic that still needs to be discussed and decided. Then there are some other possible provisions. Now this draws from the correspondences that we've received. One is the possibility of reducing number of EDUs if there's a significant reduction in AMU, and I would say that probably significant sustained reduction, not just a short time reduction. And another one is provisions to encourage efficient use of electricity. That's another theme that has been in the letters, that a lower electric rate will somehow encourage inefficient use of electricity. So there may be provisions we want to discuss to address that. And then finally, well, what should our effective date of this rate, of a new rate structure, if we choose to do that? What's the effective date, and which should the communications to customers be? So those are the things that I think we need to discuss. Now, is there anything else, board members, that is not in this list that Eric should add before we proceed to the public hearing?
That's a good list.
Okay. Okay, then at this point, how many hands are raised, Eric?
So far, only Howard, but I imagine people didn't quite understand that. So
Okay.
just to reiterate what President Rickard said, if you think you'd like to speak on this at all at any point during the public comment, please raise your hand now, so we know how many people wish to speak.
Yeah. And if something is said that you want to then speak, obviously, if you don't raise your hand now, it's not going to, you can raise your hand later. I just want to get a sense of how many people. So let's get started. I'd like to open the public hearing and invite public comment. Eric, why don't you go ahead and.
Sure, Howard is up first.
Okay, Howard.
Okay, well, thank you. I'd like to say, first of all, just to make it clear to everybody that raising your hand doesn't mean raising your hand physically. This is virtually, at the bottom where it says reactions on the Zoom screen. If you're not familiar with raising your hand, you go to the place where it says reactions. And then it says raise hand, because I know like last time I was doing the wrong thing on this, and I'm sure there are other people that spend less time in Zoom meetings than I do who are participating. So if you want to speak, please do that. I've spent a lot of time talking to an awful lot of people all around, particularly Kirkwood Meadows Association, that is the west side of the valley. We have people that are on fixed incomes who would be adversely or beneficially affected depending on how you set things up. But as I said in the comments that I submitted for the June 12th meeting, the more drastic the change made at this time, the more likely it is to have some unanticipated effects, and the more it's likely to hurt people the most. I heard from members of the community that they would like very much that there be some sort of a minimum charge. So whether it's, I mean, it could be constructed many different ways. I've heard different ideas on that. So I think going to like an 0.5 EDU minimum is very, seems very fair, and doesn't hurt any one group of people except those who just barely use their places. And most people feel like they should be paying their fair share just for having the availability of such highly reliable electricity. So I think that that's moving in the right direction. It seems to me that the board was deciding last time basically between 14.7 and 25. And that's what most of the comments were about during the rate hearing. And that decision was never made. And I think that had that been made, it looked like it was leaning towards 25 being the preferred. So now we have new numbers that are coming up, 22, 19, whatever. And there's a lot of confusion in the community. And I hope people understood what was, being discussed and what Eric Christensen presented here. But I think there's still a lot of confusion. So I think most people would like to see the board take their time on all this and not make any really big decisions today. And in particular, what people really like is getting a letter that shows them exactly what their existing rate is and their existing monthly charges. And I thought that was very well done before, but now we have all these different scenarios. So I think if you're going to settle on a preferred one or two scenarios, I think that needs to be communicated to everybody, and they need to be able to see how it's going to impact them. As far as the need to cover the property tax shift, I think that should be really made in a way sequentially after you've decided which is better for the community, 14.7 or 25. And then you'd be looking at adding on to 25, either increasing the base rate or increasing the usage rate or splitting it 50-50. So Eric Christensen presented 3 alternatives, but they were all based on the assumption that that the board had already decided on 14.7. And, I totally object to that. I think that the 25, and I gave reasons, and I think there are other reasons, such as the ski area being very agreeable to going to 25. It's a less radical change. And there's a lot of concern within the community. How is this going to affect things? So and I understand the motivation of Bob Epstein for going to 14.7. I totally understand it. I just don't think it's a wise policy. In fact, I think it's radical, and I think it's really unwelcome within most of the people that I've talked to in the community. So I would respectfully request that the board consider first deciding between 14.7 and 25, and then decide how you're going to handle the impact of the property tax revenue shift.
Okay,
And as far as homes with solar, I don't think any of us have really strong feelings that way. I think most of us just want to make sure that anybody who invested in solar is treated pretty much like everybody else. And we want to see as few special cases as possible. And a lot of people are not very comfortable with the idea that over whatever time period you choose, that they're going to be locked in forever on some rate. We have people who, for one reason or another, make changes in their lives and don't want to be stuck paying for a very high electric bill if they plan to use their place at Kirkwood a little bit less. So thank you very much.
well, thanks, Howard. Appreciate your comments. Thank you. Eric?
Next up is Ann Fleur.
Hi, Ann Fleur. Ann Fleur, are you?
Unmuted. Okay, there we
Okay.
go. Unmuted now.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I also sent in some written comments. I wasn't going to go through all of what I had sent in, but just wanted to reiterate a couple points. The first one being regarding the base rate. I think that the concept of having a base rate that helps balance out fixed costs is a really great one. My concern really lays in making sure that that base rate is set up in a way that is fair, and I'm concerned about using customer usage history and setting that in stone without it being variable as the way the means of setting up what that base rate is, and think that if it's going to be a fixed base rate, it needs to be based off of fixed costs or a fixed measurement system. And if it needs to be based off of usage, and especially in trying to be sensitive to the shift in people's monthly costs, or yearly costs, I guess is the way it's being looked at, then it needs to be flexible and change over time. And then the other thing that I really want to make sure that is being thought of as part of this process is sustainability and energy efficiency. And I just think that it's too important to lose sight of, and really needs to be one of the key goals of the PUD, and can't be overlooked in setting up these rate structures. And I think that the direction that you guys are going is the right one. And I think that lowering kilowatt per hour costs will help people start making that transition to more electric usage. But it needs to be, we also need to not try and overlook the energy efficiency component of it. And I think in the long run, there's a lot of other ways the PUD can help people switch from propane use to electric, and overall increase their electric sales, while still trying to encourage people to be as energy efficient as possible, and work with people that are doing solar. I mean, I think that part of the solar discussion, something I haven't heard come up yet, is that new homes are required to have solar. There's exceptions and loopholes, but those aren't necessarily going to last, because that was the last building code was the first time that those were introduced. And I anticipate that they will be updating those as the new building code cycle is coming up in a year. And so I think that it's something that needs to be considered and weighed as part of this. And so I just encourage you to not rush the decisions on this. I think that changing things now and then changing things again in a year is going to be difficult and not well received in the community, and that trying to get this right. And I think you guys are most of the way there. But I think that taking the time to really do it right is definitely worth it. So I'm just encourage you to do that.
And Flora, I'd like to ask you a
Yep.
question, because this notion of energy efficiency has come up in a number of letters and comments and so on. Can you describe to me how you see a low electric rate? I mean, how will energy inefficiency manifest itself? I mean, what will people do that would be classified as being energy inefficient?
Well, I think that lower rates, the first thing that comes to mind is heating. Is like people just suddenly now they're not trying to pinch their pennies and paying for heating, and maybe they've been heating their house to 60, 65, and now they're just leaving their heater on at I've experienced people putting their heaters on at like 70, 75 and just leaving them there. And so I think that it opens up the door to people being less careful with their energy use. And I think in the long term, and this is something that the energy experts in all of California are talking about, is this transition to electrification and away from fossil fuels. We're going to be running up against energy shortages. And so as part of the push for electrification, we also at the same time really need to be working on increasing energy efficiency. And what that looks like in our climate, and this applies throughout the state in a lot of different ways, but specifically in our climate, it looks like improving insulation of your house. It looks like improving your heating systems. It looks like improving your windows, all of which in the long term mean that you use less energy to heat your home. And things like light fixtures and appliances are such a small amount of electrical usage nowadays. Most of the usage is really driven by heating, especially in our region. And so I think continuing to try and encourage customers to make smart choices about how they're heating and provide incentives to have more efficient heating systems, and switching their propane heating systems over as they need to be switched over the next 20 years, people should be looking at transitioning to electric systems. Because that's the way our state's going, and that's the way that we're going to need to be moving. But in order to do that, and in order to have enough power to do that, people also need to be working on their energy efficiency throughout their houses.
Okay, thanks, Flora.
Yep.
Next person, Eric.
I believe Gene Reuter was next.
Hi, Gene.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be able to join you, and I want to express my appreciation for what I have been getting from the PUD. We try to be very careful about our usage. We got a very small water heater. We don't use the electric dryer. We try to turn off our lights when we're not in the room with them, and so on. But when I heard some of the arguments, the suggestions and so on about this new change in the electric charges, I thought that it probably would be something I could handle, because I try to be careful. But then I heard so many different numbers being juggled around, and as soon as we worked out some formulas with some of the numbers, we heard that they were being dropped and others were being used. And I think that the people I've talked with have all shared a kind of a concern, a confusion about what is in it, what we're in for. And so I'm hoping that you won't rush this decision, because I think it's very important for you to calculate things and notify us all so that we have a comfort with what we're being dealt. And I wonder if everyone who buys a lot in California should be paying a base rate, electric rate, to join our club, to be part of the supporters. And we have seen a lot of projects started around here on property, and then the owners gave it up. And those spots that are owned by different people should still be contributing to our PUD in some way, and with some base rate that gets them on our panel, on our level. So I'm just gonna sit back and wait and see how it comes out. My adjusted gross income is under 12,000. So I don't know if I belong here, but I think I would favor some kind of a 25-cent charge for the rate, and see what I get for the base rate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jean, and you of all people belong here, believe me.
I want to stay.
Good. Other hands, Eric?
Yes, the last one is Carolyn Scott.
Okay, Carolyn, hi.
You just have to unmute Carolyn. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I have to admit, I haven't read everything that's come out because I've just been extremely busy, but I'm wondering, I haven't seen anything about how this is handled in other PUDs. And I haven't seen anything about whether you've looked at the PG&E tier structures or time of use structures or anything. I feel like we're trying to reinvent the wheel, and I don't actually have an opinion right now about what we should or shouldn't do on all this stuff we're reinventing, but I'm wondering why we are reinventing the wheel instead of looking at other PUDs, or maybe you have been, I don't know.
Okay, Carolyn, thanks very much. Did Doug want to speak?
Doug is next. Nice background, Doug.
Do what I can for you. Hey, everyone. Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak again today. I'm generally encouraged about the way that we're going, the direction that we're going. I think just in terms of the base rate versus the usage rate, the way I do think about this is that, the way I think about starting the pricing of our electricity is that you should start from an economics perspective. And given that the 13.7 was the original, very well approximated cost per kilowatt hour, I think that's the right starting point for where we want to be in terms of the per kilowatt hour price. And then after that, I think I've said in December when I first was engaged here, is like after that, it comes back to how do you allocate the fixed versus these long-term fixed costs? Does it go into a literal fixed cost or a variable charge? And I think what we realized is that when the ski resorts shut down and we have these extreme circumstances, that we could go not be able to meet our loans. And I think that's the right move to move this into a fixed base rate. And then this additional $270,000 to me feels very consistent with the conversations on the general movement to a fixed charge anyway. So I'm not sure why we wouldn't include that into a fixed charge, given the way that's the way I understand it, at least. And so after the 13.7, then it becomes, what are you doing to be more environmentally friendly? Okay, adding a cent per kilowatt, or I 100% support doing that to IREX. Should we add more, value, more additional dollars per kilowatt hour to fund energy efficiency programs? We could charge more to subsidize, heating, as Anfor was saying. It's going to be a huge source of kilowatt hours in the future. So they're all programs that we can do, but I think it has to come down to the economics initially, and then working from there in terms of how we structure it. And so that's why, some of it becomes opinion in terms of whether it goes to the fixed or the base rate for some of these things. But I think given the logic that we've been talking from, and why this origination of a lot of this, it seems like that at least the 270,000 extra would go into a base rate and not the usage rate. And I think there are a lot of other things that we can talk about in terms of how the EDUs change over time. I mean, we've talked about this at some level of, maybe at the risk of discouraging the electrification, you do recalculate it at some levels. There are significant downsides to that, and that you're basically making a much longer term variable cost if everything is recalculated, but that might ameliorate some of the concerns of the community. And people, but it might be confusing to people why they might be feeling like they're getting bait and switched in some ways. If you're saying, oh, all of a sudden it's 14.7 cents per kilowatt hour and I just electrified everything, but I'm still being charged these big prices. I mean, people might be having concerns there, but in some ways that might be more fair. And I think that's where the fairness and equity is more of just an opinion at some level, because I think the motivation to move to a fixed base rate for the next 30 some years or whatever is to encourage electrification. But I mentioned before, the propane prices could also go up to better reflect their environmental costs as well. And you don't have to do this all in the electric rate. Not that this is a propane study, but I know that that's potentially something that could happen again in the near future. So I think there are a lot of dimensions to this, and it's complicated, and I appreciate everything that everyone's done, but I do appreciate and encourage where we're going with this in general.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. Eric, any others at this point?
There are no other hands raised.
Okay. In that case, I would like to close the public hearing and bring this discussion to the board. So what I'd like to do is go through these topics, take into consideration all that's been written and said as we go through it. So Eric, could you go to the next slide?
Do you want to entertain a motion?
Oh,
to
I'm
close
sorry.
public comment
Forgot I had to do that.
officially?
I'd like to entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Thornbrook, so moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
Schroeder, second.
Okay, a roll call.
Rickard,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Thornbrook, aye. It's unanimous.
Okay. Now we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. And Eric, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay. So this is a discussion about base rate and usage rate. It's one of the main topics that people have discussed. The staff report includes these three possibilities. I just want to confirm, I believe that all of these assume $300,000 available from property taxes when needed to help fund the electric department, so we meet tier ratios. Is that $300,000 right, Eric?
What they actually do is replace $270,000 of property tax with these rate structures.
But I think the assumption in the calculations is that a certain amount of it will be used from property taxes.
There still would be property tax available. We just eliminated 270,000. Generally, it runs about 500,000 is what we use on average. Some years it's higher, some years it's
Yeah, I know
lower.
in our draft budget that we saw on June 12th, it was 600,000. So anyway, so something on the order of $300,000 is what we're saying would be available should we need that. I think that's what that means. So are there other board member proposals besides the three that are shown here so that they all can be discussed at one time?
Yeah, I'd like to add the 25 cents option augmented by the 270K either through the base rate or through the usage rate. I think this option was actually desired by many people, but we never voted on it. So I don't think it should be eliminated upfront. So I think it should be part of.
Bertrand, were you saying 25 cents inclusive of the 270?
No, 25 cents, and then I don't know what the exact number, depending if we put the 270K on base rate or usage rate. I don't have the calculation for that, but it's easy to do enough.
Okay. Well, I have a suggestion, something that I've worked on. And Eric, maybe you could just, this is a PowerPoint, I think, right? So can you just put under other board proposals, 25 cents use rate?
Yeah, I had to PDF this. I didn't have enough screens to multitask. I needed a third screen,
okay,
but I'm taking
okay.
copious notes.
Okay, well, the proposal I'd like to make, and then I can explain it after we just, I don't want to dominate the discussion here, but is, I'll just say how I came up with it. I took my understanding of how much we may be required to allocate to wastewater treatment plant project, the financing, to get financing. And I'd like people to understand that this is not just some whimsical or pet project. This is an essential project if we want to keep this valley operating reliably. The wastewater treatment plant is 45 years old. It's got lots of old parts. There are often failures in multiple parts of the system that staff works hard to fix so that the things can keep going, but it can't last forever. We had a whole study done on that. So this is not a whimsical project. This is an absolutely essential project that we have to finance. We have to finance on the order of $7 million to repair, renovate the wastewater treatment plant. And that is going to require, in order for us to finance that, it's going to require a property tax, the ability to allocate property taxes. And we won't be able to do that reliably if electric continues to take on average $500,000 and as much as $600,000 or $650,000. So what I did was I said, well, okay, I think that at the outside, we could afford $450,000 in particularly low years. And I define particularly low year as 10% shortfall from the 6.8 million watt hours that we are currently targeting. That turns out, when you then figure that out, so this is a little bit like starting with a 25 cents and then where do you go from there? Well, but anyway, I came up with 22 cents and $119 a month. That to me is pushing the limit. It's lowering the base rate, the base rate as much as we can, and putting as much control into the user age as we can to for the community and how they use electricity. So that is the idea I wanted to discuss, was $119 a month and 22 cents per kilowatt hour.
And Eric, you said a 10%?
That's right. I went from 6.8 down to 6.1.
Okay, I just want to say that in 2014-15, it was a 14% drop from a low
Right.
snow year.
Yeah, the low we've had is about 5.9.
Right.
We've had a year that was a little over 6.2. We had a year over a little over 6.3.
Right.
We've had as high as 7 or so.
Right.
And my thought, and I know that this is somewhat of a hope, but my thought is that with a lower usage rate, that there will be some additional use of electric that are likely, not absolute, but likely bottom is probably more than the 5.9 that we've experienced twice. And I'm hoping it would be no less than 6.1. And that's where that came from. It's a pure judgment thing. It's a pure, how much risk do I think we should be able to take in order to use Howard's word, soften the impact of the base rate a little bit. I realize it's not a huge amount, but it is something.
Eric, just so I understand, you were including the 270 moving property tax that was included in your numbers?
Yes, and includes the 1 cent.
I just ran the report, Bob. I'm sure you're doing the same thing I am, and that actually, based on the report, generates about $300,000 more than current. So that's, or sorry, 360,000 more. So might be even a little bit higher than to get to that 260 we were looking for. Of course, I didn't include the 1 cent kilowatt hour. So
yeah, I think when you do the 1 cent, it's about even.
Brings about, yeah. So that, I mean, you're seeing the same thing I am probably, Bob. It looks like those numbers will satisfy both things.
The revenue from those numbers are compatible with the 3 other choices in terms of total revenue.
Yes. So just a cross check, just to let you know, Eric, we just did a quick check and it looks like you're right.
Okay. So I just want to, I know people are, I can understand why they're kind of confused about, we had the 14.7 and 127, and we had the 25 and 105. But what happens if you just start with a 25, it pushes the property, it puts too much stress on the property taxes, and we will end up having, I think there's too much risk that we're going to have to keep borrowing from electric to fund other departments, which we don't want to have to do. So in any case, that's my thought, was 119 base and 22 cent. Trying to get the 22 cents as close to 25 cents as possible, but without pressuring property taxes beyond what I would be comfortable pressuring the property taxes for. Okay.
I kind of thought that at our last meeting, we had come to a consensus that 22.5 cents was something that we wanted to do a projection on. And I don't know why that hasn't happened. Was that a is that a bad on my part or what?
Well, there is an error on my part, is in the chart that we presented. I calculated the 22 cents, assuming a 540,000 increase instead of a 270. So I take full responsibility for that typo. And that's where it came from. So when we
I kind of thought we had a consensus.
But that would, yes, but that included an error of increasing the revenue by 540,000 instead of 270.
Okay.
So Peter, the
and I
equivalent
take
is
full responsibility for that error.
Okay. I just, for clarification, I'm not laying
Yes.
any trips on anybody.
No,
believe
no,
me.
you're not.
so Peter, the equivalent at now is the 127 a month base rate and the 19 cent per kilowatt hour. That's where the 19 cents absorb, or the use rate absorbs all that additional $270,000, and the base rate stays where it was when we were thinking 14.7 cents. I come up with a 22 cents. I backed into the 22 cents by saying the maximum property tax under low usage would be 450,000, and that's how it came up to the 22 cents.
Well,
Or the
okay,
lower base
maybe
rate,
you
the lower
could
base rate.
explain something to me. How does usage affect property taxes? I mean, aren't they, it's based on recent sales? I mean, can't we anticipate the property taxes revenues are going to rise significantly, especially when you have homeowners that have owned homes for a long period of time that are selling right now?
Well, I don't know what the sale value is compared to the appraised value, so I don't know how to answer that. It would be nice. I mean, our property tax.
Well, just considering Proposition 13, if you have you've owned the same house for 30 years in Kirkwood and all of a sudden you sell it like a lot of people are doing, I have to assume there's going to be a jump in property taxes. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, Prop 13 only applies to your primary residence, not to your second homes.
Oh, okay. I'm wrong.
You can only carry Prop 13 with you to your primary residence. But that being said, yes, there will be an increase. It will not be significant. We get 20 cents on the dollar. So
okay.
And it was, I think, Bob, was it about 70 homes that changed hands?
Yeah.
69, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Eric, just for the public's benefit and the board's, there are three things happening. The first is a reallocation of exactly the same revenue between base rate and usage rate. And we are doing that for financial necessity. Then we're adding 1 cent to move to 100% renewables, up from our legal requirement of 36%. And then we're adding a 6% rate increase, the first rate increase in 5 years on electricity. Before the rates are actually slightly lower now than they were 5 years ago. So the first rate increase in 5 years, a 6% increase, in order to cover the fact that our costs have gone up, our non-cash expenses have gone up, and we've been relying on property taxes to cover it, and that's no longer financially reasonable or possible. So those are there's a revenue neutral change, there's a 1 cent per REX, and a 6% overall revenue increase. And then what the chart is that we're discussing is combinations of usage and base rates that would cover those three things.
Yeah, in round numbers, I believe that we need to bring in $5.3 million of revenue, about 300,000, let's say on average from property taxes, which leaves about $5 million that need to be generated from a combination of base rate and usage rate.
Yeah, close enough, 4.9.
And Peter, you're right. And I do think actually, I think Prop 13 is for all properties. I know Alpine County can't raise it more than whatever it is, 2% or whatever it is. But you're right, Peter. If property tax revenues increase, that puts less pressure on property taxes, and the rates can respond accordingly.
Or maybe we can afford the fire department.
Or we can afford a fire department right now, which takes $150,000 of property taxes.
And is based on volunteers. So there's a safety risk.
So in any case, Peter, did that answer your question? I just want to make sure.
Sort of, I'm still pretty confused. So basically you started with a 13-cent kilowatt rate, and you added a penny for Rex, and then you added the 6 cents for increased costs, and that got us 6%, excuse me. And that got us to 17? Or is that got us to 19? I'm confused.
19.
That would get you to that 19 holding the base rate constant.
Okay.
And just to be precise, it was 13.7.
Okay, all right. I knew it was 13 and change.
Yes, yeah.
And then, Bob, you might comment on, the mix between base rate and usage rate is really around certainty as well.
Right.
Right.
That's right. So we have fixed costs and we have variable costs. The 127, well, the starting point put all of our fixed costs in the fixed base rate, but without any significant change in people's annual costs, with the exception of people that have very, very low usage or no usage.
Okay.
So that was revenue neutral for the majority of customers.
I guess, how do you justify having a usage rate that's lower than what people pay elsewhere? Like,
well, it's not.
PG&E's other customers.
Well, let's look at that SMUD. SMUD's
well,
average.
No, I don't want to look at SMUD. I'd rather look at PG&E because
why?
Because SMUD isn't relevant to us. PG&E is relevant to us. They transfer our power.
No, they don't. We have they are not involved in our power in any way.
Well, how does the power get here?
They maintain 1.7 miles of overhead under a fixed contract for 30 years.
Through exchanges and deregulation, which is artificial.
Our power is managed by the California Independent Systems Operator. That's where all the meters are. We purchase power on the day-ahead market from a variety of generators that have surplus power to buy. We have no relationship with PG&E except we have a 30-year agreement for them to maintain 1.9 mile, 1.7 miles, whatever it is, of overhead line. We have no relationship with them.
In theory, to me,
in practice.
I think.
What about when they island us?
I think both SMUD and PG&E are not really relevant to Kirkwood situation. So I'm not sure we should compare.
Well, who would you like to compare to?
Efficiency. And that's basically bring up what Reed has sent to everyone. What does it make? What makes sense for efficiency?
Well, let me ask you a question. SMUD average charge is 14.7 cents. Do you think they just are filled with inefficient customers that we shouldn't model ourselves after?
They don't have at all the same structure and fixed costs that we have. At the end,
yeah, but if the idea that a rate is so cheap that people are going to abuse it, let's look at, are people abusing SMUD's rate at 14.7 cents? Is that what we think?
I don't know. I mean, possibly, I don't know. I mean, I would not be surprised that some people set AC very low and heating very high because they have such a low rate. Yes, quite possible.
I guess I don't want to micromanage our customers.
I don't
want to
either.
babysit them. I trust them to make informed decisions. And so charging what it actually costs us, as opposed to artificially making it higher, thinking we're going to change them, you know, after all these years of 65 cents, if they haven't done their efficiency now, I don't think that's what's going to drive it.
You keep saying that, but this is not relevant. Heat pump technology was not really viable. It is now. Things change, and the fact is, nobody has a base rate at 80% of the bill. Nobody.
Nobody has our fixed cost per customer.
I understand. So we are different. That's what I'm saying, and
we are.
There are side effects of having such a high base fee. And one of them, it is discourage conservation. Yeah, that's not the only one. But anyway.
Well, I'll just give some comparisons to the extent that they're relevant. I'll just say that here in the Bay Area, where we have an electric car, it costs about 12 cents a kilowatt hour to charge that car. So since one of the main things we'd like to accomplish is to enable electric vehicle charging, that's an interesting comparison. But Bertrand is right and Bob is right. I mean, we have a completely different set of circumstances. We have few customers and high fixed costs. I don't think anyone else has that, at least in the lower 48 states. So we have to face up to the reality, and we have a call on property taxes, and we don't get a whole bunch of property taxes back from the counties. We only get 20% of what's paid out to them we get back to use. And we've got to spread that over a whole number of departments, like $150,000 to the fire department, for example. So this is our reality, and I think we just have to face that reality and say, what is the best way to allocate the fixed versus the variable? My suggestion is to allocate that in a way that we don't stress property taxes to the point that we can't meet our electric rust ratio and potentially our wastewater treatment plant loans, whatever our temporary financing is going to require, and then whatever Russ will require on that. So to me, it comes down to how we allocate property, what's available with property taxes. Because I would like to have, I would like the base rate, for all the reasons that have been discussed in letters and so on. I'd like the base rate as low as possible and the use rate as high as possible. And my judgment is that that's 22 cents and $119 a month.
Yeah, my point is similar to Howard. This is a radical change. And I think going to 25 cents would be a very prudent step. It actually has support of a lot of people, including the resort. And if it looks perfect and there are no objections, maybe we can go lower later. I don't think we need to clearly, if we do 25 cents, all the objectives that we have raised for this rate change are actually met. There is not a single one that is not met.
Bertrand, then if we do that, can John Schroeder and Eric and Standish O'Grady, and when they're talking to the bond placement agents, honestly say that we will have sufficient property taxes available to back up the wastewater treatment plant loan?
I'm sorry, I totally support the tax allocation change. That's actually independent. I don't think that we could actually do that tax allocation change anytime independently of that usage rate.
But Bertrand, that's only if we sell 6.8 million or more.
Yeah, that was my comment that I was trying to tee over to Bob, was to comment on the certainty. If it's in the base rate, you're certain you're going to cover that property tax. And if it's in the usage rate in a down year, you might not.
As I said, there are two different issues. And I don't have a problem mixing the two together. But in one case, you are looking at base versus usage. And actually, my biggest issue is not which number we're going to pick, is how we do things at base. That's a different, but we'll talk about that later. So, and then we have an issue that we want to decrease the tax reliance of the electricity because of our other need, including the funding of the sewage plant. I'm all fine with all that. And I think we could actually, we said it initially, that even if we don't change the rate, we need to change the tax allocation. And that these two things doesn't have to be together. We can do it, be together, but they don't have to. But I am in support of doing that change, because I think too much, the electricity department is taking too much of tax allocation, and you have a lot of other need.
Yeah, and to reinforce the timing on that, we're in process on the commercial funding, and we'd like to close before the end of the year. So we need to resolve at least the property tax issue.
I'd be happy to put a motion now on that if that's what Eric wants us to do.
Well, what are we saying? What would the proposal be? This is
that we need to reduce we need to raise the tax, the electricity. Okay, start again. We are going to reduce our reliance on tax allocation by 270K. So we can allocate it to other departments.
Yeah, no, I think we've decided that. I mean, I think we're all in agreement to that. We're all in agreement with that.
Yeah.
But then the question is.
So what's the question? I didn't understand. I mean, yeah.
Well, then the question is, so let me just, I'm sorry to potentially confuse people because these are numbers, but let's just go through this process here. If we have to raise $5.3 million in revenue, this is at, well, if we need to raise $5.3 million in revenue, this is at 6.8 million watt hours of sales. And we want to say that typically $300,000 are available from property taxes. That means that our base and use rates need to raise about $5 million.
4.9, yeah.
Okay. So the higher the usage rate, the more of that $5 million is going to be depend on use. How much is used? The lower the base rate, the same thing. So higher use rate, lower base rate. That means you're depending more and more on use, no matter what, no matter if it's a 4-year drought, no matter what Vail's decisions may be about opening and closing the resort, no matter what people's decisions will be about using their houses. We're going to have to get more and more money out of use, the higher the usage rate, because that's going to be coupled with a lower base rate. So my question that I pose to myself is, how low can actual use sales go before we get into trouble, potential trouble?
Well,
and so my conclusion of that is, because if you do 25 cents, you just give me a second here. If I do 25 cents, just give me a second. And we have that low use rate, which was higher than our lowest that we've had twice, then we simply exceed, I think, what is a wise risk on property taxes. That's the problem with 25 cents. Otherwise, I wouldn't have trouble with 25 cents, because I personally like a lower base rate for people to carry around with them, month to month. But the 25 cents just stretches the property tax issue too much. So that's if we could say, we're not saying 570, we're saying, because we're taking the 270 out, we're saying 300. And that 300 balloons to close to $5 million if we have a poor year. And that's what we can't afford. We would not be able to do both electric and wastewater and fire and playground and employee housing if we have that kind of a year. And people just don't come up, or the resort closes something.
Well,
We don't have that property. That's
Well,
the problem. It's the numbers.
we have lived with that risk for many, many years. So the question is how likely it's going to happen. And even if it would happen, it's not like we are going to fall in an abyss. I mean,
But
then
Bertrand,
we would have to raise the rate to meet our obligation. And
we'd have to do it
okay, we could
emergency.
decide to raise right away, as needed. But I think we are going to find side effect to these changes, and I would be feeling much more comfortable with a prudent approach. And I've moved. When I started this discussion, I was thinking 50 cents. I've been convinced by a lot of this argument and numbers, and I'm totally comfortable today with 25. And if it's 22, I might be convincible as well. But I don't think we are in such a dire situation. I think it's interesting that we need to have clean finance so we can secure the financing for the sewage plant. I totally understand that. But I'm not convinced of the rush on that, because if we do the tax allocation change today, the problem is solved without changing the rate.
Yeah, the reason we haven't been in trouble before is because with the 66 cents is because we were willing to allocate $600,000 we were able to allocate $600,000 from property taxes in those low years, which we can't do anymore. Yeah. Anyway, Bob, why don't you give your thoughts?
Well, we've spent a year looking at these numbers, and we will and the issue is a low snow year. The only reason we escaped last year is because of COVID actually allowed us to avoid having to meet our loan covenants. Otherwise, we would not have made, I don't know how we would have gotten through the calendar year 2020. So that's the situation we're in. It is serious, or we wouldn't be doing this. So I think we need to get to a minimum amount of base rate coverage. And I don't see how to make that less than $132. If people want to move some of it and charge a premium for power over what it costs, I guess I'm willing to concede some changes there. But at 25 cents, we're not going to make it through a low snow year. And that could be this next year.
Okay, John?
Yeah, it goes back to my question about certainty. I mean, if it's in the base rate, you're certain you're going to get the revenue. And if it's in the usage rate, you're exposed in a down snow year. And then everyone has their own opinion. Am I going to use more electricity at 19 cents than 22 than 25? Personally, I wouldn't. It wouldn't have any impact on me at all. If you talk about leaving your heat on, almost everybody's heating their house with propane anyway. So if we change the electric rates and I say, well, I'm going to start heating my house to 72, it's really going to hit my propane bill more than my electric bill. So we'd like that to be the future where people convert to electric heat, but that's not the situation today for the large part of.
Well, actually, I'd like to add a precision here. For my cabin, half of my bill when I heat comes from the electricity to run the pumps, and the other half is propane. So even propane heating require electricity.
Well, I think of the condos that are all electric.
Yeah.
And right now, I talked to one gentlemen, and I don't know if others do this, but I think they probably do. They burn wood rather than use the electricity because it's so expensive, which I don't think is particularly good for the environment. And this person said, wow, if it goes down, then I can actually, use electricity to do more of the heat and use less wood for that. See, to me, that's not waste. That's a beneficial use of electricity.
Yeah, or they could decide to have the house be comfortable when they arrive as opposed to freezing. I don't think our message should be, people, you should really be freezing when you arrive, because that's the right thing to do. I think there's a beneficial use of electricity. We can make it clean. We should be offering that. We need to move to a situation where there are highly electric homes, and you can't do it with the barriers we have in place right now.
Well, there is no debate on that. And actually at 25, 22 or 19, we achieved that already.
Okay, Peter, any more
Yeah,
thoughts
well,
from you?
I'm more confused now than I was before this meeting started, to be honest with you. When the base rate that's on this chart, does that get multiplied by your usage rate?
By your number of EDUs.
Yeah.
So if you
Okay,
have
so I was
one
at
ED,
two,
one
so mine will double. My base rate will double than what's on the chart.
yeah, if you're at 2,
Yeah, okay.
it would be 2 times
Okay.
whatever the base rate is we're talking about.
Okay.
Well,
It's just, it's confusing. And we haven't really, and if we agreed on that usage rate multiplication factor, is that already been agreed on, or is that just part of we assume we're going to go with that? Because I've heard arguments against that too, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
yeah, that's the next slide where we talk about how we calculate average monthly use, which then generates the.
I guess I
dwelling
do.
units.
If you look at Eric, your math at 22 and the math here at 19, I just want it validated that we get the coverage in a down snow year.
Yeah, like I said,
that you've calculated, but it'd be great to get that validated. I don't have a strong opinion between 17, 19, and 22, to be honest with you, except that you do get a greater certainty that you're going to get the revenue in a bad snow year from a higher base rate.
So what I did, I'll tell you, at 6, if it's the 22 cents and the 119, if we if we have a low snow year, meaning about 6.1 million watt hours rather than 6.8, which is a little higher than our lowest, which is 5.9, then we would have to allocate $450,000 of property taxes to electric to get up to the revenue target. So that's the level of the risk. So it's 450 rather than as much as 600 or 650.
Yeah, which seems tight to me.
To answer your question, John, yeah, I did validate his numbers.
Okay, I appreciate that. Not that I don't trust you, Eric. It's just.
Oh, sure you don't.
But
he didn't say which Eric.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Neither one. But anyway, it does sound tight, and I don't see it being that material to our customers either.
Which thing, the 22 or the 19, you mean, or is that what
The difference in the monthly bills, and this doesn't seem to be that significant. I mean, we're not talking very large numbers. Yours was 105?
119.
No, 119.
119, so $8 a month.
$8 a month times the EDUs.
I mean,
yeah, well, for a person with,
about.
well, from some people's perspectives, $100 a year is something. For other people's perspectives, it's not. My view is just to set this based on what we think a bad year would engender as far as a property tax need. And I'm suggesting that 6.1 million watt hours would require $450,000 of property tax And I think we could handle that. At 25 cents, it would start to approach 500,000, and I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay. And
So that's where I stand
and
right
that's
now.
that's at 6.1, where you say our worst was 5.9.
Yeah.
So what did you give
Because
us?
because I think that, well, first of all, since the 5.9, there have been a few new houses. I think that with the lower rate, there will be some beneficial electricity use that doesn't occur right now. So I'm just willing to take the risk that what has been the floor or the worst year over the last 11 years would not be that bad. It would be a couple 100,000, be a 10% reduction rather than a 14% reduction from the 6.8. It's a pure judgment thing. It's what comfort am I with that risk? And as others have said, as Bertrand says, if we do run trouble, we'd have to do an emergency rate increase. But I'm willing to go with that at 22 cents. And that's as far as I think it's. I understand the 25-cent discussion. I understand all of that. But from this
I just
perspective,
want to,
I'm saying 22.
I'm sorry, an emergency rate increase would be in a situation where there's a low snow year. So there's very little commercial activity going on. And if you're talking about raising several $100,000 over a fraction of a year on the residential customers, that's a huge increase. So I think the emergency rate increase is a disaster.
And I'm just saying that I don't think that would happen. I basically, and I understand it's a risk, but I'm saying that I don't think it's a big risk. I don't think, so I just, maybe I'm wrong. But
It's certainly not desirable, but this is what happened when we started the process. We had 30 million to get that Out Valley project, the grid connection, and we end up at 60 million. So now we have to pay for it.
yeah, just to be clear, Bertrand, that includes the
Yes.
30 million did not include the powerhouse, which was
It does, yeah. Sorry.
12 or 14, and it didn't include the amount that we had to pay PG to get out from under their thumb. So
Yeah.
yeah, the construction of the Out Valley was about 36 or 38 million.
So we added how much for the substation thing?
Well, the powerhouse was about 12 or 14 or something like that.
14.
And then
That includes the MU purchase.
No, that was in the,
No,
we also had to pay, what, 3 million to purchase the burned down
Yeah.
powerhouse.
Yeah.
1 million actually for that. Yeah.
It was 1? Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was 3.
2 million for the propane and 1 million for the electric. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In any case,
well,
in any case, is there any more discussion before we see if we can come on I mean, I know there's disagreement, but to be honest, the disagreement is in a very narrow range.
I agree.
So we should be able to settle on something here.
Mhm.
So would somebody care to suggest what we should settle on? And if nobody says anything, I will suggest it.
I guess because there's such strong sentiment for going for a higher usage rate, I'd make a motion to go for the 127.19 because it's the highest that is been vetted pretty well, and I probably don't have the same risk profile as Eric Rickard on what would happen if we have to do an emergency rate increase, and it buys us a little more assurance.
Okay, if that were
I'd kind of like to discuss the EDU ratio before we agree to a base rate. I mean,
okay.
I thought the whole concept here was to come up with a base rate that's more equitable to the whole community, whether you live here or you don't. And I don't see that here.
Okay. Well, let's put this aside then for a moment and go to the next slide. I'm assuming that nobody wants to proceed at all with the thing that was analyzed by Eric and put in this in the staff report, which was migrating to specific averages for each type of residence.
Yeah, that was clearly not a bad idea, not a good idea.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay. So what we have, the average monthly use for all residences over 3-year period, and it's very similar to something over a 5-year period that hasn't really changed, doesn't change much, is 230 kilowatt hours per month. That's average across all residences, not commercial. And so the equivalent dwelling units, EDUs, equals average monthly use divided by 230. So someone who uses on average 230 kilowatt hours per month would have an EDU of 1. Someone who uses 460 would have an EDU of 2. Someone
Okay,
who
what's the current rate for the average EDU? Do we have that?
760.
Yeah, that's because it's computed totally differently.
Right.
Yeah.
It's commercial
Yeah.
and residential.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense because clearly it's an estimated dwelling unit, not commercial unit. So I think that's done properly now.
And there's a lot more EDUs now.
Yes.
So it's 2,448 EDUs when it's done this way.
So I totally support that new calculation of EDUs.
But Peter, I just want to make sure it's clear. So, and what we've have tentatively decided, at least, I thought we decided, was that if someone's average monthly use over, say, a 3-year period is under 115, which is half of that 230, then the minimum they would pay would be 1/2 of an EDU.
Right, right.
Okay, so that's the way it's calculated. So the question is how do you calculate average monthly use? And this has been the topic of a lot of the comment that's come to us.
Right.
Because right now, we've been counting the past year, which was the pandemic year. What's interesting, it was a pandemic year, but it was a low snow year. So interestingly enough, the differences aren't as much as you would think, but there are differences. And what I've looked at it, and in fact, residential use is up some, not as much as people would expect. And commercial is down some, but probably not as much as you'd expect. But there is definitely a skewing because of the pandemic, particularly in the lower commercial use in the summer, because that can only be attributed to pandemic, not to low snow year. So, do people have ideas about how we should be doing the AMU calculation?
My opinion on that is because of COVID, I think we need to be able to revise this EDU. I don't like the idea of a fixed EDU based on the past for a long time in the future. I think this is, I mean, the same way I'm not comfortable with having a base fee that's customized almost by the customer. I mean, typically base fee is something that everyone pays the same. I understand we cannot do that because of our high percentage of base fee, and that's why I'm going along with that. But so my question, and I would be fine with the way it is computed today, including the COVID year on 3 years, provided we every year for 3 years we have reevaluated that until COVID is no longer in the picture, because it does skew things toward commercial a bit. It does skew things. I mean, a lot of people had very different patterns of usage during that year.
So here's an idea, Bertrand. Well, really 2 ideas. One idea is to use 3 other years, 2017, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20, and ignore 2021.
That's a good idea.
Another idea, second idea, is to use 2018-19 and 2019-20, and then 21. So we start out with a 2-year average, and then we adjust that after 21-22 use is in. So then that would be those 3 years, and we just skip over the pandemic year.
That's
And
that's a good idea.
one reason why I like that idea, I don't know that, I'd like to hear what Eric thinks about that from a staff perspective, and Bob thinks of it, well, and the others as well. But one thing it does is I think it will give people a sense that they have a little bit more notice about exactly what's going to ultimately happen, and a little bit more control. And I think if we did that, though, we would have, if somebody is building it, I know there are 2 additions going on in houses right now, I think, a couple new houses being built.
Mhm.
And I would think that that if they were to choose to use electric rather than propane for aspects of those things, that electric use would somehow be removed from their use average. So they're not penalized for putting in, for electrifying in advance. But in any case, those are 2 ideas.
Yeah, so the first one, I subscribe to it. Either go for the previous 3 years, not including COVID, or 2 and adding another one. And maybe we can start, yeah, that I could be comfortable with that. As far as subsidizing people's choice, I don't think the best way to do that is through the rate, because it's a very long-term commitment. And I think we need to keep things simple. And the best way to be fair is to treat everyone the same. If I never had a hot tub in my house, so my EDU is reasonable. And if it's set up in stone, I can add up a hot tub, and I would pay very little for the consumption linked to the hot tub, while other people with a hot tub before the change would pay much more. And I don't think that's fair. So I'm really concerned of subsidizing rate for whatever purposes. I think we have other ways to incentivize. And that has not been part of the discussion, unfortunately. And I ask, actually, we try to have this energy efficiency discussion before we do the rate change, but we have not.
Bob, I know you've got thoughts on this. At least I think you do.
Well, to me, the biggest issue there is whether the fixed cost, the fixed AMU, is it fixed or is it recalculated? If you recalculate it, it is just a hoax and a trick. It's giving people the impression that they pay 22 cents or whatever it is per kilowatt hour. But in fact, that's just temporarily because next year their base rate goes up to account for it. So I just think we got to make sure people really understand that if the AMU is not fixed, it is just a temporary savings in electricity that you just pay for next year. And it actually doesn't matter at all what the usage rate is at that point, because whatever it is, your base rate just goes up. So to me, the question is whether I don't care how we calculate it or how many years we take, is it fixed or does it just change? And if it changes, then we've solved the problem of the financial stability. But otherwise, electricity costs the same as it always has. It's 66 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, it's 70 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
You just don't notice it because your base rate catches up the next year.
It's not that fast. It's because we are using 3 years. So, but the fact is there a serious change in consumption? At some point, it needs to be reflected. I don't think we should give blanket allowance for people to consume at a cheaper rate than their neighbors.
Then if that's the case, just recompute. It doesn't make it 5 years and recompute it every year, and make sure people don't make any permanent increase usages without understanding that that's 70 cents a kilowatt hour, because that's what they're paying. And that's fine.
With no baseline.
Well, it's you take your total kilowatt, your total cost for the year divided by your kilowatts, and it'll be 70 cents.
I just don't understand why we should give a break to some people. Give me a good example. Why should we say your case is worth better than your neighbor and you can have a better rate? I don't understand that.
Well, that was the reason we went through the exercise that some people thought was crazy, but the exercise that was reported in the staff report today. That's exactly why.
Oh,
You see the result. You see the result that you talk about this being a radical change. That would be a super radical change, and we want to avoid that.
Yeah,
John.
So kind of recap. We had five. I think we had five priorities for this rate study, and the first two were the ones we talked about already, so we don't have to revisit. It's about supporting the existing debt and securing new debt and property tax allocations to that. There was another that was to share the fixed allocation more equitably across all the ratepayers. And I think, that could be argued. If you're ended up paying more, you might argue that it's too much. But I think we're addressing that. I think there's one to not create change from the old structure to the new structure. And I think by using the averaging to generate the AMU and EDU calculations, we keep the change as low as possible. The one that suffers is to promote electrification, right? That's the one that ends up not being fulfilled. I mean, it does lay some groundwork that could make it easier for us in the future to do something, but it really doesn't make electricity less expensive. And we'd have to come up with another scheme to entice people to convert to propane, or we'd have to come up with a scheme for a large new development to do something like, sub-meter heating or something like that. So I think we had 5 goals. I think what we've talked about so far was trying to achieve all 5. When you start recalculating EDUs on a regular basis, you're starting to sacrifice the electrification goal.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. But I just don't know if it's a Kirkwood community responsibility to take that on, actually. So at this stage, I don't think we should make winner and losers. So
and there are some ones that are there's some of them that's really foggy to look at, but I think I've looked at all the meter data now more than once. And there are some, like if you shut down a restaurant during COVID, you obviously have a low year and you expect it to come back up, right? You've got other things like snowmaking that fluctuates drastically and uses a ton of power, but it's tied to nature, so it's more understandable, right? So there are, like Bertrand, what you're saying is it's true. There's some, like the restaurants, that definitely had a low EDU year in there because of COVID.
Yeah. So I agree that I would like to find a way to solve this, but we don't have the answer currently. So one way to do it is just say what John is saying is, we'll just go with the first 3 priorities, and then we'll look for a way. What do we really want to incentivize? We want to incentivize electric heat. The way to do that is to not have it factored into your base rate. If we can invent some way to achieve that, then that would be a specific thing that anybody could take advantage of it or apply it retroactively or whatever. That's one of the things we're trying to encourage. We're not trying to encourage keeping your hot tub warm when you're gone. So we could just sort of say, well, we've accomplished 3 goals. It's been hard. We've made some changes, and we'll just keep looking for a way to incentivize electric heating by excluding it from your base rate under some proposal yet to be invented.
Yeah. I'd like to point out that planning, this is one of the biggest focus of the planning committee. We start on several fronts on that, and it's going to be our focus all year long, hopefully to be able to come up to some suggestion to be actually effective by June 2022, knowing at that time we would have actually collected funds through the public good charge that we could use as well.
So are we narrowing down on a proposal for which years are going to be used for AMU?
Well, just make it, I would start with 3 and add it up until you get to 5, and then just make it a 5-year, average. And an opportunity to, in the future, have somebody to exclude electric heating from the base rate when we figure out how to do that in a way that's conceptually manageable.
And so
I find the big variable on that, as I look at, it's the number of days people are present. We've done all sorts of analysis of how much energy do people use when they're there, when they're not there. And the big variable in all of this is how many days you show up. We had a customer who was there for 300 days, or they were, and their average is 60, and so we don't want someone to, we don't want to have the system be manipulated by encouraging people. The best energy efficiency would be to stay away from Kirkwood, right? That's not what we're trying to do. People are entitled to their homes. They're entitled to the lowest cost of power we can provide. That's what our business is, reliable and affordable, so they don't even have to think about us. The first 3 steps provide a lot of that, but the final step of allowing them to electrify their home without it costing more than what it costs us. Because when we have the base rate covered by the 6.8 million, when people go over that, it doesn't cost us much money for that power. I want to pass those savings on to people so they can be more comfortable in their homes.
So what is your proposal then specifically, Bob?
My proposal would be that we'd start with a 3-year AMU. We'd average up to 5 years, and we'd adjust it every year. And at a point in time when there's a good idea of how to exclude some beneficial use from the base rate, then we could discuss that as a board. And
so you would include 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, 21, 22, and 22, 23?
Yeah, I would start with these 3 and then average in 4 years next, then 5. And then in 5 years, nobody's going to hide anywhere, right? Well, I'm going to buy the place, not use it for 5 years to save money. I mean, if they're willing to do that, they're welcome to it. Yeah. So I would do that. I would do 127.19 and call it adjourn the meeting.
We got a few other things to talk about. But
well, you really don't, because none of the well, we have a few other things, but a lot of those other things go away when this isn't a fixed AMU.
I agree. The one thing actually on your slide, Eric, which is a possible exception, having a process that for people have exceptional situation that last could actually address to get their EDU revised. I don't know how we can do that simply. I like when everyone is treated the same, so it's kind of opposite direction here. So what do you had in mind, Eric, for that?
Yeah, well, actually the 5-year thing, if we were to do that, helps mitigate this some. Well, I was just wondering, based on all the comments we got, was that if a person or a household has some sort of sustained significant reduction, sustained and significant to be defined, in their use, that they could ask to have their average monthly use in their EDUs recalculated. So in other words, let's just say someone, for whatever reason, drastically reduces the use of their home for a period of 3 years, and it's consistent. It's not just 1 year, we were traveling in Europe and we didn't use our house. It's like, no, this is a significant and sustained change. Then I would certainly be open to having them being able to have their EDU recalculated to reflect that significantly lower change. Enough to lower your EDUs by, I don't know, 0.5 or something like that. That's what I was thinking there. But at this point, if we're going to average in 5 years and somebody completely changes their use, then that average is going to go down. So it somewhat mitigates.
And they could increase their usage and it'll take us a year to catch up.
Yeah, or they could increase their usage.
in the future. Yeah, I mean, the thing about some of the commercial accounts is it was really obvious, like I mentioned before, if you stopped operating a restaurant, you're probably going to return to the historical data. But when you look at the residents, I think it's a little bit subject to whatever the new normal is. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
which we don't
is
know
it
yet.
really going to return to the way it was, you know, pre-COVID, or it will be some variation on that? So that's where, if you go with what Bob was talking about, you're going to recalc on an annual basis with 5 years of history. You're going to track pretty closely, I think, to their actual usage.
Okay, well, what do people think about the 5-year then? John, you think it's a good idea? Bob obviously thinks it's a good idea. Peter, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think if you're going to implement a change and include the data from last year, that the 5-year makes sense. It would neutralize and then, you know, the odd year.
Yeah.
And Bertrand, you agree with that?
I agree. 5 years would be a significant improvement because it will water down the COVID year. It still have to resolve the issue of dramatic changes, sustained dramatic changes. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have, I think, I'm fine with the 5 years too. So if we do make that change, then let's go back. Can we go back to the previous slide then? Because Peter wanted to have this settled before we talked about not that one. Yeah, that one. So I think Bertrand and Bob like the 127 base and the 19 cents.
That's John.
I mean, excuse me, John and Bob. And Bertrand, I know you're in favor of the 25 cents and whatever the base rate would be on that.
Yeah.
I think the base rate on 25 cents would be about
112.
112 and 29 cents, according to my calculation.
Yeah.
About 112. And to be honest, I
appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, I personally prefer what I said, 22 and 119. So those are 3 choices.
I agree with that.
So I mean, Bob and John, do you really think that going from 2022 and 119 is that big of a risk that you would reject that idea?
I do think it's an unnecessary risk that we could expose the district and the customers to a pretty onerous situation and put us under duress. Obviously, we're getting pretty close on numbers. So, you know, the closer that the usage rates get, the less of a delta there is in risk. My first inclination in the last meeting was to go for 136 and 14, I think, because there is a risk in a down year of not attaining the revenue from usage, right? So that's my rationale for 127.19 is it just is a little bit lower risk profile.
Bertrand, have you changed your mind at all? Or
I can compromise to 22.
Okay. And Bob, you'd have a heart attack with the 22?
No, my heart's in good shape.
That's good.
What's Peter's opinion? I don't remember hearing his.
I think he said the 22, I think.
Yeah, I would prefer the 22.
Well, there's a huge value in having the board be unanimous on tough things.
Yeah. So
yeah, like I said, I think the numbers are close enough that it's not that significant of a difference in risk.
So if we did 119, 22 cents, we'd accumulate up through 5 years and then it's fixed.
Yes.
Yes, that would be significant improvement in my opinion. Yes, I would support that.
Okay.
And I think I've got that, Eric. So 119, 22, the past 3 years plus the coming 2 years will set their base rate or set their EDU at the end of that period. And then we would revise it. And no one said this, but I just all these other things shoot off of this tangentially. So everybody else, people that come in, new customers, we'd still base the 1 year on the prior, and then they'd have 4 years to get to their 5 year. New homes would have 5 years, et cetera. I'm assuming this all bleeds through consistently, correct?
I think so. Bob, is that what your thought was?
Yes.
Yeah, it would make sense. I'm still not too excited about different treatment to different people, but that's a different topic.
Yeah.
At least it's, pricing signals are important, and it signals a rate that's going to stabilize at 1/3 the current rate. It won't get added to your base rate in a couple of years.
Okay, can we go on to the next slide? I just want to go through these slides, make sure that we've covered them now.
Just let me know when to stop, Eric.
Stop there. So this is now, yeah, what you just said. It'll be 5 years. Next one.
There was discussion. This is the revised one where we're just going to only use 1 year of the base. So it would just 1 year, 1 year plus 2, 1 year plus 3, 1 year plus 4. So that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes?
So I just want to point out to anybody who's listening that this change is a direct change of customer comment, of community comments.
Okay.
That particularly those who have purchased homes and have changed their use significantly from their previous owner, objected to being subjected to the previous owner's usage for 2 or 3 years. So this just changes it to 1 year. Okay, so the next slide. So this is the one where it's the same 5 years, but the fourth bullet we are excluding. If the new home or building has no propane connection, the calculation will exclude electricity use. That's what's going to be considered for the next year, over the next year.
We haven't solved the problem of how to incentivize, starting with electric, and we haven't solved the problem of somebody converting from propane to electric, because it's just going to accumulate into their base rate.
Right.
And then,
Only for 2 years, based on what you said.
Yes.
For 2 years.
And they should wait 2 years and then convert.
Right.
But maybe it'll take them 2 years to design it.
1 year to design, yes.
Yeah, and then a year to install. So maybe it hasn't slowed anybody down.
Yeah.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so this was a question that came up to me. I know it hasn't been discussed. But what if there is a significant addition to a home? Do we care? Well, at this point, it'll be included in current additions will be included in the next 2 years.
This would be an issue 3 years from now.
Yeah.
I think if it's a significant, it should be treated like a new construction. With a threshold more than 30% or 50%, then you are a new construction.
But the new construction starts out at 1.4 and then grows. So that could be a huge discount.
Yeah.
Double your home and save money.
Well,
pay for it with your reduced energy.
For a short while.
For a short while, yeah.
So
one easy solution to that, Eric, would be just start tolling the 5 year period again if it's a significant addition.
Yeah, it could. Yeah,
you could do that. Essentially,
it's treated the same.
Yeah. And for the ordinance that we'll consider, Eric, do you want to take a crack at what significant means?
The ordinance is drafted by district council, not me, so I will run that by Dick, but I kind of like what Bertrand said. If it adds more than 30% square footage or something, that might be a reasonable trigger, because most of these are garages and they don't generally add more than 20% of a footprint. So I mean, a garage really isn't going to do much in my mind in terms of electric use, but like I said, I like Bertrand's 30%. It seems, I mean, it's a arbitrary number, but it seems reasonable and logical, but it's up to the board.
Okay, well, I don't think we've had enough time to really think about this that much. I just wanted to bring it up, and if it can be put something as a placeholder put in, that would be good, so we could discuss it in July.
It could also be just deferred until later, and planning could just go over that, and then we could make an amendment to the ordinance later on. There's no reason we have to put it in right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that would be better than the
Okay.
pressure of trying to invent a solution in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Next slide.
Bertrand, are you willing to take that on in planning?
Yep.
Cool.
Next slide. Okay, this was the 9 existing homes with solar panels. We had started out with suggesting that there'd be a 4-year period in which what I'm calling the net kilowatt hour usage would be the basis for AMU, and then would switch to the overall calculation. We changed that after discussion to 7 years from initiation. Is there appetite for changing this at all? Or are we okay with 7 years?
I'd like to make a comment is, I mean, all these calculations were actually based on the 66 cents cost of a kilowatt hour. So once we switch to 22 cents, the number of years to pay back the system is going to increase dramatically. So I think this 7 years is actually, especially for an installation that was done last year, is still not going to allow people to recover their investment.
Do you have a proposal?
I would put it at least 10 years because of that.
Make it 10 years?
Mhm.
Well, I can live with that.
John, Peter, what are your thoughts?
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I'm okay. It's only 9 homes, right? It's not being extended to new solar
Right.
No,
installations.
it's only people who made a judgment decision based on the old rates.
Right.
Okay, 10 years, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, well, we've solved bullet number
We've,
1 because, well,
right.
somewhat we've solved it because we're going to see what happens over 5 years.
Right.
And provisions to encourage efficient use of electricity. That's the planning committee topic then. Is that right? Bertrand, is that right?
So I'm sorry, I missed you. I was not hearing properly. Can you say it
well,
again?
Yeah, I said that the first bullet on this slide is kind of
Yeah, we
put on the back burner for a while
yes,
because of the
exactly
5 years.
because we went to 5 years. I agree.
And the second provision is something that's associated with what you're doing with your planning committee.
That's correct.
Okay, so we don't have to decide on that now.
And we have actually planned to come back with plans and suggestions to the board before the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this gets at what I think Howard talked about and maybe a couple others. So we sent out a letter in, I think it was in May, with an understanding of a particular rate and a particular base rate and particular use rate that was before the $270,000 issue. It was suggested that a new letter should be sent out articulating these decisions. So my question, I guess, the open question right now is, do you agree that that should happen? John, Bob, from the Finance Committee.
It would seem that we should communicate what the decision is, yeah, if we can do that.
But I mean, what the impact is on customers.
Yeah, Bob, that seemed like, speaking for you, that seemed doable.
Absolutely doable, yeah.
Here's my thought, and I know that there will be some disagreement with this. But my thought is that we should have then the revised ordinance, the language that are in front of us in July. And we should be sending out these letters. I don't know when the letters could be done. I know it's, a lot of emails, letters, etc.
Just tell me when you want it.
Well, the next meeting is what, July
10th.
July
right?
10th.
That's correct.
So that, I mean, basically, there's no way that the letter will actually be in people's hands probably for any more than a week before July 10th. So
I think it's conceivable, but I think that's,
When would you like it, Eric?
yeah, no, it's really this envelope stuffing becomes the biggest problem for staff. That's really the bottleneck for customers that haven't signed up yet for electronic, so there's only, I think, Bob, correct me, about 230 customers that only get everything via mail at this point. So, if it's a one pager, the envelope stuffer can do it. We could have them out this week if the board makes a decision.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you what I'm thinking. And like I said, I know there will be some disagreement, but my thinking is that we consider the ordinance in July. And if we all agree on it, we pass it, but have it effective August 1st, August 1st, so that we be sure that we have adequate communications to people so they know what's coming. And at minimum, they would have a week to 10 days to look at it and be able to, say whatever they have to say about it before we do a final action on the ordinance. I just think this communication issue is a really important issue. If people still feel confused or that we've rushed things too much, it's not going to be good acceptance of this. So that's my thought. My thought is that the effective date would be August 1st. I realize we would lose a month of the higher revenue, but it's when I looked at, on the residential side at least, the chart that Bob created, the graph that Bob created, that is more than made up versus our 66-cent scheme that we have today. It's more than made up in subsequent months in terms of revenue.
Yeah, financially, I'm not concerned about. It's putting aside the extra work for staff. Having it effective August 1st, I don't think financially is any material issue. But we would potentially approve it on July 10th. And when would you like people to receive the letters?
As soon as possible. I mean, tomorrow, if it were possible. But I mean, because what happens is people will see these things. They won't necessarily read them right away. They'll get around to it.
All right.
And
So,
I just think that they should have more than 7 to 10 days to actually look at it in the first place, absorb it.
okay.
Either get mad at us or say, oh, this is better, or whatever they may do.
Well, I'm just trying to understand. So let's suppose, a hypothetical, let's suppose the letters go out on this Friday.
Yeah.
Then a week later, we have a board meeting potentially to approve them.
Yes.
And let's say somebody doesn't like it. I mean, it's already approved. They got their letter. What do they do with the month of July?
Well, what we can do is put off the approval. I mean, it sort of depends on what we hear. If people
I mean,
feel
rescind the approval or what?
No. We would
Oh.
look at the ordinance. We'd have one reading of the ordinance. We would have a sense of whether or not we're all on board with it as a board.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could either choose to vote on it or not. But in any case,
Okay.
it would be effective. I mean, to me, it all depends on whether or not our community feels like it's been communicated to them and that they're no longer confused.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I've heard from people say. And I read it in the emails. People don't have all the facts. They don't get all the nuance, which it's complicated. I don't blame them, but they need to understand these things. So, and maybe some of us go out and talk to people about it, but I don't know. It's just, that was my thought. My thought was that we would have it effective August 1st, whether or not we pass the ordinance in July or we pass it in August. I don't know. That's just my thought. I'm open to everyone else's thinking on it.
I'm fine with an August 1st effective date.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part is that the 270,000 property tax decision, that was kind of uncovered while we were pretty far into the process. And I think that caused a lot more confusion. So what you're talking about, Eric Rickard, is probably a good step to reset and let them see, what the numbers are. And because we did show them the other numbers that didn't include that revenue increase. So that's pretty good.
Anybody else on this?
I'm comfortable with the time frame proposed here. I think it's very important that we re-communicate with all the customers with another customized letter that's going to show them effectively what they will get. And as far as August 1st versus July 1st, it's a cost. I'm flexible.
Okay, well, that's the end of the slides. I just want to say, was there anybody who had raised their hands that wanted to say something during all this discussion?
There was some, yeah.
The only person who still has their hand up is Carolyn. Howard did say he was going to lower it if you went with 22, but he has to back up again. And he had it up the longest time. So I'm
Okay.
gonna, if you're okay with it, I'll let
Sure.
Howard.
Sure.
Okay. Howard, I just need
All
to,
right.
there you go.
Thank you, Eric. There's been a lot said here, and I have to say I like the way that the board has been kind of doing some give and take here. This is a complicated issue, and I appreciate, people showing some flexibility. And I think that, I could give you some very specific examples, Eric, which I'll do Eric Rickard, at a different time of the conservation thing, but I don't really think that is the real issue here. I agree we need to have a more reliable rate structure. And although I would prefer to see 25 or something higher, I think if you end up at 22, I think that's a reasonable enough compromise that I think most of the people that I know in the community would accept that. And we would have a chance to see how things would develop. And Doug Mitaratonda had mentioned something about being economics based. There's one piece of economics that has not been taken into account, and that's called the law of supply and demand, which says that when you lower the marginal rate, you're going to have increased consumption.
Yep.
We don't know how much that will be, but I guarantee you there will be increased consumption. I don't care what happens with everything else. People are going, just like the people who will use more electricity to heat their all electric homes. They're already all electric. They're going to be more comfortable at 22 or 25 or whatever you end up at. They're going to be more comfortable using that electric heat. So there will be more consumption. People who have electric cars will be more likely to charge their electric cars at Kirkwood, or even install a new charger into their garage. And so there is going to be more electric consumption, and that will have a positive effect on being able to meet our obligations going forward. And also along those lines, Peter Dornbrook mentioned increased property tax revenue. And I think we know we can count on that. There are homes being sold, and there is going to be an increase in the property tax revenue. So once again, thank you for all your hard work, all of you board members and staff on this. And I'm hoping that you'll come up with what I think would be a reasonable compromise, which would be 22 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. And one thing you said that really makes me want to be sure, and I know that Bertrand's committee will do it, but just make sure we have a way of not penalizing people who have heretofore not used electricity and foregone very beneficial use because of the price. I don't want them over the next 2 years to say, oh, I still can't get my condo heated. you know, so whatever that way is, it's just going to be important that we find that way. Okay, who else? Eric?
Carolyn Scott.
Okay.
Okay. I just want to comment that you talk a lot about residential versus commercial. As I understand it, the Meadows building is considered commercial, and I don't know what other condo buildings are considered commercial, but it seems like
None of the condos are
No.
considered commercial, Carolyn.
They're treated as residential.
okay, well, that was my concern, that you're
Yeah.
considering the Meadows as commercial, but okay, because
Residential.
numbers, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And the last one, Eric, is Devin Martin.
Hey, I actually just wanted to kind of reinforce a point that I think it was Bob who made about how the EU gets set. I actually just bought a unit this month. And so as soon as I saw the rates, my first plan was like, okay, I need to, it has a wood burning stove. I was gonna upgrade it to a pellet stove so that I could at least kind of have remote control over it, set it ahead of time when I come in. And then I was told by the property manager about the rates going down to, 15 cents or whatever. And I was like, oh, never mind. I can just run off of electric at that point, which I think is what is the purpose of these changes. But as I think it was Bob made the point that, like, if you're gonna set my EDU based on my first 3 years usage, then I'm going to go ahead and get that stove because I'm going to be paying in my base rate for that electrical usage anyways. So if that's how the EDU is getting set, I'm still going to get the stove and like not use any more electricity. So yeah, just something to consider in how the EDU is set. I don't know if there's a way you can set it on square footage or home values or something like that, but if you're tying the EDU to usage in a way that I have control over, then you're still charging me that extra amount. So it's got to be set over in some way other than electricity usage that I control.
Devin, your observation is correct, and that's the thing I want to make sure people understand is if they increase usage, their base rate will go up until year 5.
Yeah.
So the message we're delivering is wait 5 years and then you can sell the stove.
It still be washed out by the 3 previous year, but the fact is,
but he's a new owner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the true thing is actually, yes, it would make sense to base rate not using the usage fee, but that we didn't went that way.
Yeah, and the reason why is we didn't want to disrupt what people currently pay. So we're in this compromise that unfortunately doesn't. We wanted it to benefit you, but it doesn't immediately. And I'm glad that you noticed that and aren't shocked a year from now. But maybe we'll find a clever solution.
Yeah, I'd love it if there was a way that the EDU could be set on something other than usage that's controlled, because like you said, I mean, at that point, like I'm still paying 70 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever, just in a very delayed way.
Yeah.
I think Doug is the last one, Eric.
Yeah, just thanks. I just wanted to comment too on, I'm glad that we were able to come to a compromise. I think this is going in the right direction. I think there are things that I'd love to have seen us gone back to the 19 cents. Because I think the reality, there was a comment earlier about, supply and demand. I think the reality is if you're going from 66 cents down to 25, 22, or 19, when I've done price elasticity demand calculations on electricity, that's nowhere near the kind of the changes you're usually pricing against. You're usually doing it on 2 cents. So that whole thing goes out the window at this point. You're going to see 40-cent change or 45 cents. It doesn't matter. That supply and demand is that elasticity, that calculation is irrelevant. And what's most relevant right now is that people, like you just spoke, understand how that kilowatt hour usage will impact them, because in some ways, like as we've talked about, like by making this, I mentioned before, like kind of the bait and switch, and the risks of this are that people are going to see, wow, it's 40 cents per kilowatt hour cheaper, 50 cents, it doesn't matter. And all the reality is that this gets pushed out. And I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily. Like there are pros to this. We ameliorate a lot of concerns by doing this, but the communications of this are going to be crucial, because as soon as someone says, oh, wow, it's only 22 cents a kilowatt hour, I'm going to do all these great things. And now they're getting a bill that's twice as much as it would have been otherwise. That's the big concern that I have here. So it's not the price elasticity of demand, because demand will change regardless of whether it was 22 or 19, given this rate structure. And I still think that my points earlier about energy efficiency and funding and all these programs that we can do, looking at propane, these are all still relevant no matter what we're doing here. But I think, especially given how we're going to go forward, again, I'm supportive of it. I'm glad that we are where we are. I just think it's really important that people understand that just because the kilowatt hour usage is going down doesn't mean that means they're getting a free, base rate through the future. And I think that's just going to be the most critical part of all of this.
And that's why it's so critical that we come up with a method for not penalizing people for getting off of propane. To me, that's key.
And I'd like to add wood stoves into that.
Yes.
Oh, and wood stoves and
I mean, we've got I think it was about 100 homes doing that. I'd like to give them some relief.
well, wood stoves, propane, and gasoline. And what we can't do is, if those things happen, they cannot be penalized, because we're now doing 5-year average. They cannot be penalized. And so somehow that's got to be solved, and it's got to be communicated that it will be solved. And whoever's on the board after the next round of elections can't backtrack on that. So that to me is key. And so we can talk about that some more at our July meeting once we absorb it. But that to me is key.
We do have one more comment.
Okay.
Caitlin Walker.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, you keep going back and forth, so I'm not even sure I actually understand what the final decision was here about whether the EDU is going to be adjusted over time or not. But if the EDU is not adjusted over time, just so I'm sort of clear, you're essentially saying that people who are currently on electric heat and use more electricity are going to essentially sort of be subsidizing people in the future, right? Because they're not going to have their EDU adjusted if they switch from propane or wood heat to electric heat. I mean, that just sort of feels unfair. I mean, I'm currently on propane heat, so I would benefit from this, but it just it sort of feels not very fair, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, that's right. I mean, I've thought about that too. But on the other sense is, when those units were developed, there was a choice to go on electric as opposed to propane. It wasn't forced on them. So.
Well, and there is some benefit, which is if you're keeping it at 40 degrees and wearing your jacket, you can now afford to have it at a more comfortable temperature. So it isn't no benefit at all. But yeah, it is a different situation.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else, Eric, would like to say anything?
Nope, that's it. So I think we just need a motion from the board to adopt all the things that have been agreed upon and have a vote.
Yeah, I think what I want to do is that these are the things that we want included in the ordinance, so we can review that in July. That's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, so I just need a motion for that, because I don't want to build the ordinance based on what I think I heard.
Yeah, right.
And have people introduce new changes at the last minute, which is the propensity sometimes.
Okay, Eric, why don't you go through your notes? I think I know what it is, but I just want to make sure. Why don't you give me the elements?
Here's what I've captured. So $119 base rate and 22 cents per kilowatt hour. The EDU will be calculated on 3 years past use plus the upcoming 2 years, and then it will be fixed. Solar will have 10 years, a 10-year basically payback period. The effective date will be August 1st. And nothing else changed out of the ordinance or the.
Yeah, that sounds like you've captured it. Everybody agree? I mean, let's
probably making a motion and a vote just for
yeah, I'd like to, yeah, then I'll.
There were a couple other clarifications. I think solar went to 10 years.
Yeah, he mentioned that.
He
Oh,
mentioned that.
I missed that.
He mentioned that.
Was there another, John, that I missed? Or was that just it?
And then how were the new owners going to be treated? Was it going to be 1 + 4?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything will roll to the 5-year
Okay,
Instead of
And-
everything that says 3 now will now become 5. So 1 year of the prior owner, and then the next 4 years averaging out of the new owner. And then new construction would be 5 years.
okay.
And we also discussed about a system for substantial remodel.
That was, yes, but that's not going to be part of this. We were going to bring
Okay.
it back to planning separate, correct?
Okay, that's
Yes.
correct.
Yep. Let's make sure I got that right. Yeah, I that's going to take more. That'll
Yeah.
be,
Okay, well, I'd like to make a motion that we ask Eric to have the ordinance drafted with those provisions. Is there a second to that motion? For
Yeah, I'll-
consideration at our July meeting.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Peter, roll call.
Okay, Rickert,
Aye.
Epstein,
Aye.
Schroeder,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
and Dornberg, aye. It's unanimous.
Okay, good job, everybody. We do have another agenda item, which is the normal, which is general discussion. Is there any general discussion from board members? I have two things, quick. The first is that Bob has suggested to me that John take over as treasurer because John is our point person on the wastewater treatment plant financing, and that he would also become chair of the finance committee. So Bob, of course, will remain chair as he has been for years on the communications committee. And I just want to let you know that. So I've asked Eric to put that on our consent calendar for July. And the other is that we're still waiting for the correct election information from the county clerk, elections clerk or whatever she's called. And so I've asked Eric that as soon as that's available, that it be posted so that people, and also to put it into our board packet in July, but hopefully we'll have that information before July 10th so that people will know what the deal is with the election.
So I think you got to file by August.
Yeah, normally you've got to file by first week in August or so, and normally you can start sometime early July, but we don't have the information. I don't know
Okay.
what those dates are. That's what
Right.
that's important. So, okay, those are my two items. Anything else?
the only thing, I don't know, Bertrand, if you want to mention it, but we will be looking at changing the date and time of planning. So we'll be doing a doodle poll when Jess gets back from vacation. She's been off since Friday. She will be back later in the week. So that just make the rest of the board aware that date and time will be moving in all likelihood. Anything you want to add to that, Bertrand?
No, there's a bunch of things we didn't do at last meeting, but I'm assuming we'll do that at the next meeting. They were not on this current agenda. So yeah, we are looking for a different date because it was a lot of work to go through both the packet and prepare for the planning committee at the same time. So we're going to put a bit more space between the two.
Great.
I have a question about the communications committee regarding communication to the HOAs about snowmaking. And I think probably some of the HOAs are going to have their annual meetings coming up. And what's the timing on getting them that information?
The snow allocation, you mean the removal, the cost, their contract amounts, you mean?
Yeah, and I think we were talking about, you know, a summary of here are the changes and here's how it impacts your HOA. And I thought that was put in the communications committee.
Yeah, the next meeting is when?
It's in the middle of July,
July 19th.
July 19th.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the new rates we approved the new rates 2 weeks ago.
That's how it's communicated to the HOAs is the question.
The HOA presidents or the HOA members?
Oh, to whomever.
Well, it goes to the HOA board and then whenever, I don't know the calendar for their annual meetings, but when they have their annual meetings, that's when they usually like to talk about that.
So, yeah, so it's in the
with all the
communications.
work we had to put on the electrical rate, I think it's going to be difficult to do something for July, for that coming week. Yeah.
I mean, I think
Eric, remind me, you were going to draft something for us to
Yes.
start with.
Well, yeah, we'll have a draft out, but we've been all on electrical rates, so we'll have a draft out for COM to look at. And then we should.
at that meeting. Yeah.
Correct. And then we should be able to get it out shortly after that. And that would
Okay.
I would just send that to the signatories, whoever those are for the respective HOAs, which are generally the presidents, but not always. I think, John, you were the signatory at one point when you were still doing snow removal versus Peter Tuxon. So it just varies, but we would send it to the signatory for sure.
Right. Okay.
Okay, anything else? If not, thank you all, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.